One middle-aged guy tried to work one thing out. One middle-aged guy tried to work one thing out.
Hey everybody, welcome to another TMAG mini, a little short episode dedicated to a single topic. It's just me, Dave, here today. I asked Chris to be a part of this one. He wrote me a note back. It's typical Chris fashion. It's pretty hilarious. I'll read a little bit of it to you. Let's see here. He says, I won't be a part of this stupid thing you're doing. Okay. Yeah, that's a good one. Let's see. You keep talking about Alien and Blade Runner like anyone cares. Yeah. Or he's got me there. That's a good jab. These are unlistenable. Okay. That's a little harsh. Let me scan down here. Okay. Well, I'm gonna move on. This is pretty funny, but it may just be for me. So it's just me today. Just thought I would take a minute. If you saw the thumbnail, you probably know what's going on. But hey, Alien Earth has just put life back into the Alien universe. And I think that as I've been looking at some of the, oh boy, I gotta say it, some of the alien groups that I'm in on social media, a lot of discussion, a lot of really great discussion, but I've seen a thread, a theme, and it seems to be caused by Timothy Oliphant's look in Alien Earth, that bleach blonde, spiky-haired look that is reminiscent of Rutger Hauer in Blade Runner, playing Roy Batty, that it's reignited this discussion that has existed for some time, that Alien and Blade Runner exist in the same universe. And there's an awful lot of this, actually. It's not just a fringe thing. There's a lot of people who genuinely believe that they do. And so I thought I would take a minute to kind of break down the arguments on both sides of this and give you my conclusion. Now, I'm not going to pretend to be objective about this. I have a very definitive viewpoint. That is, these two franchises are in completely separate universes. So I wanted to, get that up front and out of the way. This is not me pretending to come up with a conclusion as I analyze the evidence. However, I'm going to be fair and present both sides of this and let you make your own decision with me giving you the input that I think proves what I believe to be true, and that is that they are separate. So let's just start this out, where this all began. 1979, Ridley Scott directed Alien. In 1982, Ridley Scott directed Blade Runner. That's pretty much where it starts, and I think for the most part where it ends, it's not completely true. There's some more to this, but they are two separate movies that Ridley Scott directed. Ridley Scott was a hired gun to direct both films. In fact, if you read a little bit about it, he was hesitant to even take the Blade Runner job because it was another sci-fi film like Alien that had sort of a this dystopian future, and he just wasn't sure if that was something he wanted to revisit. So he was a hired gun. He did not create the world of Alien. That was Dan O'Bannon, and from a visual perspective, H.R. Giger, who created, I think, that sort of world. Although O'Bannon's original script went through rewrites, significant rewrites. And if I just say this as an aside, if you enjoy the film Alien, go read the original script, and you'll see just how different it became with the rewrites and how much better. Oh, I can't imagine. If they let me just say this. If they had in 1979 filmed the original script, we wouldn't be talking about this, and we wouldn't have seen much more content from Alien, I don't believe. At any rate, 79, Ridley Scott, hired gun to make Alien. Classic film. Scott brought a lot to it. I love it. I give Scott all the credit in the world for the way that film turned out. But wasn't his story, wasn't his universe. Doesn't own the IP. On the other side, in 1982, we have Blade Runner, which is based very, very loosely, I would say really not based, but inspired by Philip K. Dick's novella Do Androids Dream? of Electric Sheep, and that it, with a script that was fleshed out, taken in very different directions from PKD's novella, which is honestly not one of my favorite Philip K. Dick works, and I've read pretty much everything the man's ever written, so I do have a pretty good perspective on that. It took it in a different direction, and I think a better direction. And Ridley Scott, again, like I said, hired gun. Didn't create the IP, didn't create the concept, didn't write the script. He came in, beautiful job directing the film, but, he doesn't own the rights to Blade Runner or the IP. He's not part of its origin or inception in any way other than he masterfully brought the story, the script to life, which, of course, I would give him all the credit in the world for. So you've got those two things going for Ridley here, but I wanted to give that perspective. For those that are on the side of these two franchises, two properties, two stories sharing the same universe, what often comes up are a handful of things, and I'll walk through them. The first is Ridley is the director of both, okay? The second is that Ridley has made comments that he sees them existing in the same universe. And in an interview, and I'm not entirely certain what year this interview came out because it's a bit tough to track down, but it looks like maybe in the 2017 time frame. He said this. He said, when the crew of the Nostromo in Alien come back in, they might go into a bar off the street near where Deckard lives. Now, he's kind of speaking just offhand, as Ridley is often known to do. He's talking about things, if you read the context of the article, about the aesthetic, the look, and the feel, but he's not actually saying these are absolutely 100% connected, and the Nostromo folks would get off and go to the bar up the street from Deckard. For one thing, Blade Runner is set in the year 2019. Alien, the first Alien that Scott directed, is set in the year 2122. So there's 100 years difference there. Earth would have changed an awful lot. And it may be, and I think that some of the quotes, some of the things that Ridley has said, he does actually in his head see them existing in the same universe. But he doesn't own those universes, so he can't quite make that official. Now, that's one thing. That's one piece of evidence, and it's a prominent piece of evidence. I'll come back to that in a moment. The next thing that is brought up, and this is an interesting one, is in the movie Aliens, when they're showing the bios of the crew of the Nostromo. On Dallas's bio, it says that Dallas worked for Tyrell for a period of time. The Tyrell Corporation. Tyrell Corporation exists in the Blade Runner universe. In 2019, Tyrell is a powerful figure in the world, maybe the most powerful figure in the world, and he's killed by Roy Batty, who did not appreciate Tyrell giving him a short lifespan. This is interesting, right? It's in Aliens, not Alien. So this was not a Scott injection. This was something that happened under James Cameron's watch. And what we have here is an Easter egg. It's a fun little reference. In fact, I've been told by people who are smarter than me that if you read those bios, there are all kinds of neat little references to other sci-fi properties and stuff in there. This is not hard evidence. This alone establishes nothing. And I'll get to why it doesn't in a minute when I talk about the counter-argument to this. But hear me out, folks, here. This absolutely is in Aliens. This was put in there by Cameron's team, not by Ridley Scott. It says Dallas was born in either 2080 or 2090. It's really hard to read that screen. And then he died in 2122 during the events of Alien. And that he, at some point, had worked for Tyrell before going to work for the company. And the company we would find in Aliens is Weyland-Yutani. And then I will get to the last piece of real evidence that is brought up as a connection between these universes, and that is in the extras, the bonus, the promo materials for the film Prometheus. And there was a lot, by the way, of bonus materials and extras in Prometheus, and they are really good. So I would suggest that, if you own that DVD or Blu-ray or you have it digitally and you can get access to those extras, they're pretty darn interesting. The most interesting one is when Peter Weyland gives a TED Talk in, I think, 2024. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but that's a really interesting, really well done, 7-minute scene that sort of sets up where Prometheus is going. But at any rate, in those bonus materials, there is some stuff from Peter Weyland. Again, bonus materials not in the film, where he references a mentor who believes that the future of post-human or transhuman, or however you want to call it, creation isn't in the world of synthetics and robots that Weyland was pursuing, but is in the world of genetic, bioengineered creatures, like what we see in Blade Runner, like a Roy Batty. That's a pretty clear reference to Tyrell. I don't believe it ever says his name, Tyrell, in this, but it's a reference. He calls him a mentor. He says they have a disagreement. I'm going to explain to you in a few moments why this is non-canon, Easter eggy, and just impossible based on what is actually canon in the films, both Alien and Blade Runner. But those are the three main pieces of evidence. There's a few other pieces of evidence, like you can see a piece of a ship in one of the Blade Runner movies that looks a lot like the Suluco in Aliens. Okay. That there is a reused graphic in the movie Alien and in the movie Blade Runner. It's a blink if you miss it sort of thing, but they reuse a graphic when the spaceship is doing something, the Nostromo is doing something, and one of the spinners, the flying cars in Alien, is doing something. They reuse a graphic, and those sorts of things are used. I mean, that's obviously just Ridley Scott being wise to his budget and reusing a graphic. It doesn't mean anything. So let me just talk about the counter arguments. So those are the things that are listed as evidence for the connected universe that people get really heated about. And let me just refute those. Let's talk about Ridley Scott for a moment here. He directed Alien. He directed Blade Runner. He has had a lot of input on the Alien universe in recent years with Prometheus, with Covenant, to a degree with Romulus. Do a little reading on Alien Earth and you'll find that he had no input on it at all. He did some talking to Noah Hawley, but Noah Hawley said he really didn't have any input. He's an executive producer. He's getting a credit. He's getting a check, but I'm pretty sure they're putting Mr. Scott out to Sir Ridley Scott out to pasture with Aliens, and I don't think he's going to get another crack at the franchise after the performance of Prometheus and especially Covenant at the box office. But a lot of folks say, hey, if Ridley says it, it's got to be true. Well, while it may be true that Ridley has input or had input on Alien, it is absolutely not the case that he had input on Blade Runner. He directed Blade Runner in 1982, but that's it. He added nothing else to the mythos of Blade Runner. He did not direct the sequel, 2049, which is directed by Denis Villeneuve. Not sure, but he knows who he is, and if he's listening, he gets it. Sir Ridley Scott, just can't say these things are connected and make it so because he has no power truly over either franchise. He's not the shepherd. He's not the protector. He's not the writer of the story Bible for either Alien or Blade Runner. So his little comments, which when you take out of context, do sound, kind of convincing, but when you read them in context, you realize he's talking about aesthetics, and he's talking about, at the very most, head canon and not actual canon, because actual canon is on the screen. And what's interesting is that Ridley directed 3 Alien films and was involved in Romulus. He directed Alien, he directed Prometheus, he directed Alien Covenant, and he was involved in Romulus as a producer with input. No hard connections in any of those films were made with Blade Runner. So if he was so on fire for making this shared universe thing work, he didn't do anything with it. And you can't count the promotional material, and I'll tell you why. in just a second. That's one thing. Ridley Scott, we got to set that aside. The next thing is the mention of Tyrell Corporation in Dallas's bio in a blink and you'll miss it moment in Aliens, which is not Ridley Scott, which is James Cameron and Cameron's team. Here's why that doesn't make sense. If you know your Blade Runner lore, you know that in Blade Runner 2049, there is no more Tyrell Corp. Wallace, played by the incredibly creepy Jared Leto, has taken over the production of replicants and assumed control, absorbed into his business, Wallace Corp., Tyrell Corporation. And this happens, the best we can piece together is sometime in the 2030s. After the death of Tyrell in 2019, the Tyrell Corporation went downhill, and Wallace assumed that you can look at some of the bonus materials will fill in the blanks, but truly, you don't need bonus materials because by the time of 2049, Wallace is the man. He's making replicants. And by the way, replicants aren't robotics like synthetics in Alien. Replicants are basically bioengineered humans that are indistinguishable from humans that require complex tests, like personality tests, like in Blade Runner's Voight Comp test, to get them to give answers that would not pass. Think of the Voight Comp test as like a kind of like a modern Turing test on steroids to see, are you a machine? A biological machine in this case, or are you a human? I'll go back to that James Cameron insert of the Easter egg around Dallas. If Dallas was born in 2080 and Tyrell Corp folded in the 2030s, it is impossible for Dallas to have worked for Tyrell Corp. That is an Easter egg. It makes no sense. It is just a fun little thing that James Cameron put in 1986. And you know what? I'm glad he did it. It's cool. Those things are fun. And so I think that we can move past that. That is not hard evidence. And the reason why it's not hard evidence is because it is refuted by the Blade Runner canon. That takes precedence over a blink and you'll miss it Easter egg, what is actually happening in Blade Runner 2049. So you simply cannot use that as a piece of evidence. Another piece here, let's dismantle this, is what I spoke about in the promo materials. Now, the promo materials, I mean, I guess you could try to make a case that that's canon, but when the promo materials don't, first of all, they're not in the film. So, you got to draw your line somewhere, and I draw my line at the film. These promo materials also make a reference to Weyland in the mid-2020s, talking about a few things. Here's the things Weyland talked about in the Prometheus special promo materials that were not in the film. He talked about, one, that we are getting close to colonizing other planets. We're finding places we can colonize, and pretty soon we'll be able to colonize other worlds. Two, he talked about how we have defeated cancer and we have cured cancer, obviously, but we have also solved global climate change, making the world a better place. And three, he unveils his masterstroke creation, David, a synthetic, which means android, which means robot, mechanical, gears, white goo blood, that sort of thing, that looks like a human, acts like a human, he's an android, he's a robot, looking like a human. Those are the big three things that he mentions. And these things are in direct contradiction to Blade Runner established lore that is established truly in Blade Runner, the original one, 1982-2019, that Ridley Scott directed. Okay, so Ridley Scott in 2019 shows a horrible world where people are starving. And certainly in 2049, the sequel, it's much worse. I mean, if they had cured climate change issues, I would think that, maybe the Earth might be looking better in 2049. Yeah, absolutely in 2049, or maybe even a little bit better in 2019. Also, if they cured cancer, poor, ill folks like J.F. Sebastian from Blade Runner, they might get a little bit more help than what they were getting in the dilapidated Los Angeles shown in Blade Runner. If we are as the special promo Prometheus materials say, near to finding planets to colonize in 2025. How do you square that to Blade Runner 2019 talking about living the good life in the off-world colony? Sign up, go there. That it simply doesn't make sense, right? Blade Runner says, it doesn't intimate, it says that by 2019, we are already off into space doing things that we have been for some time, at least 5 years, maybe more. In Prometheus bonus materials, Peter Weyland is saying, pretty soon we're going to be able to go out into space and colonize. Those simply don't make sense. They're not compatible. One more point around this is David. David is this incredible creation from Peter Weyland unveiled in 2025, a robot that looks human, that can function and think like a human. And look at this. We're going to be able to use this for, all sorts of things, space exploration. Isn't it incredible? And it is incredible. Unless you compare it to the technology in Blade Runner, where replicants have been around for a while. Now, how long exactly? Well, I can tell you that Roy Batty was, in 2019, was at the end of his 5-year lifespan. He was a Nexus 5, the 5th generation of that. So at a minimum, they'd been around since 2014. But being the 5th generation, you can probably assume he had been around you can probably assume that replicants had been around for 10, 15 years before that. So it doesn't really make sense that Peter Weyland would be bragging about building a robot that's really smart in 2025 when Tyrell had been engineering actual superhumans for maybe 25 years prior to that. That they were doing all sorts of incredible things with the colonies, fighting wars, establishing, outposts on new worlds. So, the technologies in general, in terms of space flight, space colonization, the artificial intelligence, the ability to create biological beings like what they are doing in Blade Runner, far more advanced than what we are seeing in Alien. And that's even if you want to count that promotional material. But even if you don't count the promotional material, it's still way ahead in Blade Runner. And you get to 2049, you've got Wallace Corp, who's still doing these things with no mention of, a Weyland-Yutani, or, boy, we got to compete with those robots, or anything like that, right? I mean, Blade Runner 2049 ignores and really just... also, I should say, the state of the world is terrible in 2049. It's not a world where climate change is solved. That's for certain. So I guess that what I'm really saying here is that nothing aligns between these two universes. The things that would make one think that they could be are really based on Ridley Scott just sort of making offhand comments and Easter eggs put into films. They're not based in actual canonical evidence. And boy, it makes me feel silly to speak about canonical evidence, Blade Runner and Alien in the same breath, but it is, in the case of this topic, true. So I hope that this is, if you're at all interested in Alien and or Blade Runner, I hope that this has kind of brought something to light for you. If you've thought about this, if you had a conclusion, maybe this will make you rethink it. If your conclusion was different than mine, it might give you some things to ponder. If your conclusion was the same as mine, maybe perhaps I've given you new arguments with which to beat over the head people who do not see that the way that we do. And that's a metaphorical beating over the head. Please don't actually touch them. Well, that's it. That's all I've got. I've exhausted myself discussing the extremely important, critical to our day and age Blade Runner and Alien subject matter. And I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked this, if you liked any of the things that we have to say on our podcast, leave a comment or check out our back catalog. We've done lots of stuff on Alien. We've talked about science fiction films, Star Wars. We've talked about such things as varied, such as childhood memories and all sorts of interesting stuff, and we'll continue to do so. So check us out on Facebook, Two Middle-Aged Guys, on our website, the numeral 2, middleagedguys.com. And we can be found on YouTube and anywhere you can get a podcast. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.